Hello everyone, back tuning into today's first video, doing the second spring 2020 update for today's first video. So we started the spring updates a week ago. 1 week today was update number 1 for the spring. Got the second update coming up for you right now, and we will carry on with the spring updates all the way through January and all the way through March as well. And we'll release a spring forecast. We've got the date for that, I'll give you that very shortly, but we will release the spring forecast at the end of the winter. So I'll get on that for you very shortly. Just to say that GWV's Sunny Roundup will be coming up later on today, probably just after lunch or over just after lunch, sometime around then. And we'll also have an Ensembles watch as well. This season will go through all 20 plus members of the GFS Ensembles, see what they're showing for the next couple of weeks. Will there be any signs of winter arriving within the GFS Ensembles? You'll find out around 7 to 8 o'clock this evening. Right, so I'll get on the spring update for you in a moment, but I've got some big news to tell you when we're going to be releasing the spring forecast. So, of course, all of these updates, and there'll be 2 seasonal model roundups as well, getting all the long-range models together. All of this is building up to the spring forecast, and I can tell you that the spring forecast will be released at GWV.com on Sunday the 1st of March. Sunday the 1st of March will be the date where we release the spring 2020 forecast. So we've got a few weeks to go before we have to get too serious, but I'll go through the latest batch of analogues for you in a second. Just say a big thank you to our analogues guru James Atquill for getting all of the analogues together that you're going to see in this video. Thank you so much, James, for doing that. Big thank you to Richard Trott for providing us with our GWV's 2020 Spring Updates GIF. That's about it. So it could be quite a long video, as always with the long range stuff. If you can't watch it all the way you go, it will be cast at GWV.com indefinitely. We'll put it onto the spring updates page. There'll be a written summary going over everything that we discuss in the video. And so you'll be able to watch the video on demand whenever you want at GWV and also have a read of that written summary. So without further ado, let's get on with it, and we're looking at December data today. So the first thing we're going to look at is December Central England temperature. So this is a CET page at Gauss Weather Vids, with every month CET going all the way back to 1659. It's the longest and most consistent temperature record anywhere on Earth. So if you scroll down through the centuries and through the decades, through the years, we come to 2019, just here, and that's December's number just there. That's December CT. So December 2019 came out with Central England temperature of 5.8. So what we're going to do through the first part of this video is look at springs that follow December's with a CET range of 5.6 to 6.0. And of course that places December 2019 right slap bang in the middle of those of that range of those years. So the first spring that we've got is 1849, following December of 1848, which again is within this range of 5.6 to 6.0. And we see that the spring of 1849 was a very unsettled spring. Indeed, it has a deep trough of low pressure over UK and much of northern, central and western Europe. It has higher pressure up towards Greenland as well, and it's sending the jet stream southward, so it looks like a pretty cool, maybe quite coldish, and also quite unsettled spring in 1849. The next spring, following a December CET of 5.6, 6.0, is 1866. This one, again, looking quite unsettled. It has some above average heights to the north, but the main thing is a deep low pressure coming in off the Atlantic into the northwest of Europe. The jet stream is on a southerly track as well. It just looks very, very unsettled there. And you would expect quite a lot of rain to be in with that, and potentially quite cold as well in the spring of 1866. The next spring, following a December CET range of 5.6 to 6.0, is the spring of 1877. And again, this one looks really unsettled with deep low pressure over not just the UK, but much of northern and western Europe too. It does have some above average heights up to the north. So there's a little bit of a blocking signal, but I think again the main thing is not particularly from a cold point of view, although there might have been some cold weather at times, but I think the main thing is just very, very unsettled, possibly even a deluge type spring in 1877. Could have been very wet indeed. A long gap, interestingly, from 1877 we had a long gap through to 1923 for the next time that we have a CET range of 5.6 to 6.0. The spring of 1923 also looks quite unsettled. Low pressure is coming in off the Atlantic. It does have a stronger northern blocking signal as well. It has some higher pressure up there in the Norwegian Sea. But overall, I think this is a relatively unsettled spring again, and not notably cold, I wouldn't have thought. Someone will correct me on that if I'm wrong, I'm sure. But I think the main thing again with that one is that it is another very, very unsettled spring indeed. Then we go through to spring 1930. So this one also quite unsettled. Below average heights over to the south of the country, above average heights up to the north. Maybe a little bit more of an easterly influence with this particular spring, as the low pressure is that little bit further southward, so possibly more aware of easy winds. But again, main thing is very unsettled. We haven't really seen any settled springs yet, have we? What does 1933 have in store? Well, this is a bit of a change. The spring of 1933, again following a December CET range of 5.6 to 6.0 in December 1932. This one is more anticyclonic. It has above average heights extending from the north through the UK and then down into the west and southwest of Europe. So that looks like it's a higher pressure type spring, with the low pressure pushed away to the east and also in the middle of the Atlantic. This summer of 1933 is a very warm to quite hot summer, and so I suspect the pattern is sort of entrenching itself already through the spring of 1933. That's probably what's going on there. Two really good summers, 1932, 1933, I think. Or I could be wrong, it could be 1933, 1934. But anyway, there was a lot of decent summers in the early part of the 1930s. Excuse me, again, got a little bit of a tickle in the throat tonight, so we shall persevere. About halfway through the I'll pause it and go get a drink of water, so just bear with me for the time being. Our next spring is 1942, again following December CET range of 5.6 to 6.0 in December 1941. This one has the above average heights more towards the east of the country, and it has below average heights out to the west. Looks like this could be quite a warm spring actually, and maybe a bit volatile, maybe a bit thundery in the spring of 1942. Then we've got the spring of 1949. Now we're getting more anticyclonic springs, you'll notice. So this one has above average heights just to our west-southwest, below average heights push north with the jet stream. That looks like it's quite a warm and dryish sort of spring in 1949. I think that would have quite a bit of warm and dry weather associated. Very nice spring with it in 1949. Spring at 1950 shows up next. This one has above average heights just out to our west-northwest, a trough of low pressure through Scandinavia. I would think this one has quite a lot of dry weather as well because the Atlantic is blocked off. The difference with this one is that it could be quite cool. I think we're bringing in the air from the northwest quite a lot with that. So that's probably a cooler spring, but again, relatively dry, I would have thought, a lot of the time. We've got 1947 and 1957, I should say. This was a very nice spring indeed, with a large area of above average heights part almost over top of the country and going northwards as well. So after all these very unsettled springs back in the 1800s, we get to the into the 1900s, and suddenly we're going into much more anticyclonic springs here. This is the best that we've seen so far. This would deliver a lot of dry and warm weather through the spring of 1957. Of course, that goes on into the early summer of 1957 as well, but it's a front-loaded summer, and that high pressure does not last into the summer, but it does give us a hot June 1957, and then the summer goes down the pan. But anyway, for the spring, basically it's a dry and warm spring. I think there's particularly warm weather at times through March 1957. Spring 1960, also looking quite anticyclonic as well. This time the high pressure is centred more towards Scandinavia, so this looks like it's quite an easterly spring in 1960. But again, very pleasant spring there, I would have thought. Our next spring, following a December CT range of 5.6 to 6.0, is the spring of 1973. This time the anticyclone is centred more out to our west, with below average heights tending to be digging down with jet stream to the east of us. So that was a drier spring and probably quite cool. I think, again, we're bringing in the winds from the northwest quite a lot of the time. But again, it is relatively dry. The Atlantic is blocked off, so it wouldn't have been particularly wet. Next spring is 1980. So this one looks like it has higher pressure up to the north. And lower pressure is sort of covering much of Central Europe. So with this one, it looks like we're bringing in more of an easterly type wind. This could be a very easterly spring, potentially quite wet in the south. I think it's one of those funny seasons where it's drier in the north and wetter in the south, and maybe even a bit thundery in the south as well. I wouldn't be all that surprised if it was in that kind of scenario. And a fair amount of easterly wind, so quite an unusual pattern in the spring of 1980. Spring 1981 shows up next, following a December CT range of 5.6 to 6.0. This one's quite an unsettled spring, low pressure coming in off the Atlantic. So pretty wet. I think it's very wet in March of 1981. And then pretty wet also in April. And with April, we also have this northern blocking coming into the mix. So April, of course, of 1981 has that famous late blizzard and snowstorm right at the very end of the month, from around the 25th. I think it's around the 25th of April to the 27th or 28th. There's a real snowstorm that affects many parts of the country at the end of April 1981. So that's a really interesting spring as well. Quite cold and unsettled spring overall. 1984 is our next spring. So this one has a low pressure down to the south and it has higher pressure up to the north. This is quite a warm and quite pleasant spring, I think, in 1984. Quite a lot of easterly winds setting up, but it's relatively warm spring. It's quite a nice spring. Wettest conditions, again, probably more towards the south and maybe a bit thundery at times as well in the spring of 1984. Spring 1988 is our next analogue year or season, following December with a CT of 5.6, 6.0. This one has a bit of a northern blocking signal up to the north, and it has below average heights sort of over central parts of Europe. It's rather unusual, rather odd looking pattern. So I think March 1988 is a very mild month. It's a very mild winter of 87, 88, and that pattern continues into March. I mean, I think at the end of March into April is quite a significant change. It does get colder. I think there's even snow, actually, during the early part of April of 1988. I think with this, there's more snow kind of in the middle of spring in April of 1988 than there is through the entirety of the winter of 87, 88. One of those funny situations. But that's a rather cool and unsettled spring over, I think, the spring of 1988. 1998 is our next spring, following a December CT of 5.6, 6.0. This one takes the above average heights out to west. It has below average heights across northern and central parts of Europe. Otherwise, heights are neither high or low over UK and Western Europe. It's a strange looking pattern. With this one, again, there's a lot of intramonth variation. So March 1998 is quite unsettled. April, relatively mild. April 1998 goes really cold. It's a cold, wintry and very wet month. There's the classic Easter floods through the Midlands. I think it's the 9th of April, the 9th or 10th of April, 1998. And then it has a hot May. It has a dry, fine, sunny, and pretty hot May in 1998. 2001 is our next spring, so this one is quite unsettled. Low pressure coming in off the Atlantic, some northern blocking left over from the winter, and some above average heights down to our south. Again, this one is quite cold in March and pretty chilly in April as well in 2001. And also very wet in April 2001 as well, and then it gets a lot better in May 2001. 2003 is a very nice spring. This one with above average heights over and to the east of the country, low pressure out to the west. This is a warm and dry spring. And it's setting up the pattern for the summer, of course, because with position of that high pressure to our east, we would be bringing up very warm or hot winds from the south, and that's the pattern that goes through to the summer. So, I mean, March even demonstrates some summer-like weather with temperatures into the low 20s, and this pattern keeps recurring then throughout the rest of the spring and through the summer of 2003, which culminates in that tremendous heat wave in the first half of August 2003. But it all sort of kicks off, actually the pattern synoptically kicks off in the spring of 2003. And then I think our last year, or our penultimate year as it turns out, is 2012. So this spring has a lot of high pressure across much of northern and western Europe. There's a lot of dry weather on offer, but what you don't really see from that, except for this trough that appears across northern Scandinavia, is that it does have a very unsettled April. So in March 2012, it's a very dry month. There's a drought actually going on well into March 2012. It breaks right at the very end of the month, but most of March 2012 is very dry. April then flips into a very cold and wet pattern. April 2012 is a very wet month, and then May 2012 has a lot of dry and at times quite warm or even fairly hot weather. And it's the best month of the summer, actually. May 2012 is the best month of the summer because the rest of the summer of 2012 is absolutely diabolical. Averaging it all out, that's how the 500 millibar reanalysis comes out. And then finally, we've got the spring of 2017, again with a lot of anticyclonic influences on offer with this spring. Above average heights centred over the UK and covering most of Western Europe as well. So that's a pretty warm and dry spring 2017. So putting all of that together, this is how all Marches combined are looking when we have a December CET of 5.6 to 6.0. And we do have a northern blocking signal in the Marches. So yes, there's above average heights towards Greenland and Iceland with below average heights to our south. So it looks like it's probably relatively dry March, actually, as the low pressure projection sort of shoved off well to the south. So on average, you can expect quite a dry March. Temperatures are a bit problematical. The position of the blocking looks like a lot of the time the Marches would be quite cold. But I think we can say that the more recent Marches definitely are relatively milder. Probably bringing in more of a southeasterly influence as opposed to a northeasterly. But there's not much in it. So those Marches could be quite cold. The main thing, though, is that they're relatively dry. April looks like that. It's a more unsettled signal for April. The above average heights are still there around Iceland. But main thing is this trough of low pressure covering much of central, northern and western Europe. So potentially quite a cold, wet sort of month favoured for April. And then May also looks pretty grim with above average heights over to the east of the country combining with low pressure to the west. So it looks like March is probably the driest month and could go either way for temperatures, but probably favours colder conditions overall. But then April and May look like they turn much more unsettled. Both April and May could be quite wet here. And potentially rather cool as well, really. Rather cool spring could be the signal. And then this is how all springs combined are looking when we have a December CT range of 5.6 to 6.0. Above average heights to the north, below average heights to the south. The blogging signal that's been skewed quite a lot by what's happening in the Marches. The blogging signal does weaken quite a lot through April and May. And this low pressure comes northwards as well through April and May. So that possibly gives us a little bit of a false impression, really, of what these springs are like overall, due to the fact that March has such a strong northern blogging signal. But overall, I would say these springs don't look particularly inspiring. They look rather unsettled, don't they? And although March is dry, it does look as though April and May are favouring to be quite wet and unsettled months. And temperatures don't look particularly exciting either. So not a great package of analogues for the spring. It starts off from that December CT range. We're going to pause the video there and we'll be back very shortly and we'll look at December England and Wales precipitation. And the springs that follow those Decembers with a similar England and Wales precipitation to December 2019. Pause the video there, you can go get yourself a drink of water. We'll meet back very shortly, around 2 seconds time, and we'll continue the second Spring 2020 Analogues update at GWV. So I'll see you in a couple of seconds time. Okay, we're back and we're ready to resume the second Spring 2020 Analogues update from GWV. So thank you very much for tuning in to our latest spring update. In the first part of the video, we were talking about springs following a December CT range of 5.6 to 6.0 because December 2019 CT came out at 5.8. So we've dealt with December CT. We're going to go on to December England and Wales precipitation now. Just say, but if you're enjoying this video, then please like, share and subscribe to the channel. And let us know that you are enjoying what we're doing through the comments to both GWV's YouTube channel and also at GWVweathervids.com. Right, so let's move on to England Wales precipitation. So this is how December 2019's rainfall looks when we average it out, set against 81 to 2010. You can see that it was quite a wet month across southern, southeastern parts of the country again, with above average rainfall here down in the south and through into the southeast as well. Further north, it's a little bit drier, near average precipitation through much of North Wales, northern England. Northeastern parts of England, interestingly, are a bit drier than average, as are eastern Scotland. Southwestern parts of Scotland are wetter than average. For England and Wales precipitation, it actually has a England and Wales precipitation of 121.8 millimetres, I should say, 121.8 millimetres. So for our range for this update, we're going to be looking at December's with an England and Wales precipitation of 110 to 132 millimetres. Again, that places December 2019 slap bang in the middle of that range, and the springs that follow them. So, first off, kicking us off, is going to be the spring of 1848. This one follows a December England and Wales precipitation of 110 to 132 millimetres. This one is very unsettled spring with below average heights across much of northern, central and western Europe. Above average heights up to the north a little bit, although that's relatively weak area of northern blocking, and a ridge in the middle of the Atlantic. This leaves us rather unsettled, to say the least, across much of western Europe for this spring. Our next spring, following a December England and Wales precipitation of 110 to 132 millimetres, is the spring of 1853. And this one with below average heights to our south and above average heights to the north. Again, quite an unsettled spring. This one could be a bit colder, though, in the spring of 1853. The next spring is 1870 with a mid-Atlantic ridge and below average heights to the east. That leaves us bringing in the winds from a north to northwesterly direction. That could be quite a cold spring. And probably drier too, as the Atlantic is blocked off. The next spring is 1881. This one has above average height sitting to our north and northwest, below average heights as a trough over Scandinavia. Looks like this would be quite a cold spring, relatively dry but quite cold. It follows a very cold winter from 1881, severely cold in January of 1881, and that pattern looks like it's continuing, at least for a while anyway, into the spring of 1881. Next spring, following a December, England and Wales precipitation of 110 to 132 millimetres, is going to be spring 1883. This one again has above average heights to the northwest, below average heights to our southwest. Looks like quite an easterly spring, this one. Remember, in spring, easterlies are transitional season, so easterlies themselves will be a bit transitional. In March, easterlies will be cold. In May, easterlies can actually be warm or even potentially quite hot. 1892 shows up next. Lots from the 1800s within this particular Analogues package. This one has the above average heights out to the northwest. The below average heights are down to the south. It looks like that's a rather drier spring and also potentially quite cold. Spring 1898 shows up next. This one very unsettled. Below average heights again through the west of Europe. So this just looks like a very unsettled spring in 1898. Spring 1901 is our next season, following England and Wales precipitation 110 to 132 millimetres, with below average heights, low pressure to the south and above average heights to the north. Looks like this one could be rather a cold and unsettled spring, with the jet stream tending to be on a southerly track. Spring 1908 is turning up next. This one looks very unsettled. This is another, interestingly, in the first Analogues package we had 1981 showing up, which of course has a late April blizzard. 1908 in April also has a late blizzard. So the end of April 1908 is very cold. There is a snowstorm that's involved with that as well. There's only two sort of snowstorms at the end of April in the 20th century. One is in 1908, one is in 1981. And they both turned up for this package of Analogues, which is a little bit strange. Then we have the spring of 1913. This one just looks like it's very unsettled spring. Low pressure from the Atlantic into the UK. Probably quite a mild spring. Winds are from the southwest, but very, very wet spring, that one. Spring 1919 next. So this one with below average heights to the east, above average heights out to the northwest. It looks like that's a very unsettled and potentially somewhat colder spring as well in 1919. We haven't really seen anything anticyclonic yet, have we? 1923 is turning up next. That one appeared in the first Analogues package at the start of the video, in the first half of the video as well. So we don't need to go over that. It looks like it was a very unsettled spring in 1923, and another very unsettled spring in 1925. This package of Analogues don't look cold, really, but they do look very, very unsettled up to this point. Anyway, we'll see what the rest of the Analogues have to say, but up to this point, really unsettled and wet springs being favour. Now, this is a better spring, and again, it showed up in the first Analogues package with the December CET. So this one is 1949 with above average heights very close to the country, below average heights up to the north. That looks like it's a drier and warmer spring. At last, within this package of Analogues, we've got a drier and warmer spring to go at. This one doesn't look bad either. This is 1961. This one has above average heights again, extending through the west of Europe. That's a very nice spring. Quite a warm April, I think, in 1961. 1967 is our next spring, following England and Wales December precipitation of 110 to 132 millimetres. This one more unsettled. Below average heights over to the north of the country. I don't think it's particularly cold, but it is quite an unsettled spring in 1967. 1973 shows up next. That was in the last package of Analogues as well for the December CET. This one again has the above average heights out to west, below average heights to the east. It looks like that's a rather cool and relatively dry spring in 1973. 1986 looks very unsettled. This is quite a cold and wet spring in 1986. That's a pretty grim spring. in 1986. So, quite a long gap actually, through to 2007. So the spring of 2007 looks like this, quite anticyclonic with high pressure dominating. So this is an interesting spring. It has a very dry March and very mild as well. April 2007 is exceptionally warm and dry, so almost drought conditions really for March and April 2007. And then in May 2007, just like that, it flips and it goes cold and wet, and it doesn't stop raining for the rest of the summer then. So let's hope we don't have a repeat of 2007, because if we do, we're going to be absolutely washed out. And then look at this, we've got spring 2012 showing up again as well. I'm not sure this is terribly good news for the summer, because other than 2007, I think 2012 is probably the worst summer that we've had so far through the 21st century. We're talking about spring though, of course, so we've already explained what happened in the spring of 2012. Starts off with a drought in March, and then it goes very wet in April and quite cold in April 2012, and then May is the best of the summer. And the summer of 2012 itself is absolutely dreadful, and in some ways very similar to the summer of 2007 really, but the floods weren't quite as bad in 2012, but both are really, really bad summer, so that's a little bit worrying to see both of them showing up in this update. But remember, we're looking at springs rather than summers at the moment. There will be a little update for the summer, by the way. I'm off on a bit of a tangent there, but there will be a little bit of an update for the summer coming up in a week or so's time. More about that nearer the time. But I will have something for summer for you, for summer 2020 for you quite soon. Right, so putting all of that together, this is how all Marches combined are looking when we're following a December England-Wales precipitation of 110 to 132 millimetres, and the Marches look unsettled, have below average heights over to the south of the country, do have a northern blocking signal, but it's displaced more towards the North Atlantic, and it's not as extensive as it was through the CT analogue. So I think there's less cold potential for the Marches. They just look very unsettled months, really. The Aprils also look quite unsettled, with a trough of low pressure over to the east of the country, probably combining with low pressure out in the Atlantic as well. So you can envisage there's a lot of westerly winds going on there. Perhaps not bad with the temperatures, from a temperature perspective. Could be relatively mild, I would have thought, with those Aprils, but potentially quite wet. And then not that much better for the Mays either. So the Mays also look like they would be relatively mild, as the winds are coming in from the Atlantic and there's no real northern blocking, but just unsettled really with these springs. I think that's the main takeaway of these springs following the December England-Wales precipitation, that they are, they are probably quite unsettled springs, to say the least. And in fact, that is how all of the springs put together, combined, are looking when we have a December England-Wales precipitation of 110 to 132 millimetres. And it is an unsettled signal, not just for the UK, we're not suffering alone, but for most northern and western parts of Europe, it does look very unsettled. A little bit of a northern blocking signal, but not as strong as it was with the CT analogues. And so, therefore, I think we can say that there's less cold potential with these springs. But they do look very, very, they just look very unsettled, with low pressure really dominating, and no doubt giving quite a lot of rain as well. So, not a tremendously good update, really, for the spring. But there we go, you go by what the data is showing. That's what it is showing for this second update, looking at December CT and precipitation. So I think the main takeaway is unsettled, really, for the spring. Temperatures, there's greater cold potential, I think, from the CT analogue package than there is from this one. This one doesn't particularly suggest to me that these springs are likely to be all that cold. But both package of analogues do look quite unsettled, I have to say, particularly so for this precipitation package. It looks like it could be very wet spring indeed based on this. There's lots more data to go through though, of course, and we haven't started the really important stuff like the QBO, like SOAR activity, like ENSO. So there's a lot more to do with these updates, and we are going to keep doing these updates for the spring all the way to the end of February. And then, as I said at the start of the video, spring 2020 forecast will be released on Sunday, the 1st of March. Right, that's it then. So that's much we can do for today. Not sure what I'm going to be doing for next week's third spring update. We may look at the QBO, but I'll decide in the next day or so what we're doing for that one. This video will be placed on the spring updates and forecast page with a written summary later on today, so you'll be able to have a read of that and watch the video on demand whenever you would like. We're going to have GWV Spring Roundup coming up for you around or just after lunch, and then we've got Ensembles Watch as well. So keep checking back to the website for all of the updates. But at 35 minutes, certainly a lot shorter than winter updates. 35 minutes, that's all for now. And thanks for watching.